Kevin Eastman, co-creator of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I'd like to ask you a few questions for my readers.
Absolutely.
Did you want to become a comic book creator when you were a kid?
Yeah, I grew up as a huge fan of an artist named Jack Kirby, and he was my favorite because he was not only a writer and artist, but he co-created with Stan Lee a lot of the Marvel Universe, like Spider-Man and Hulk. Like Steve Ditko did Spider-Man, but he worked on so many popular characters, and I always had a dream that he was such a complete artist that he wasn't just a writer, or he wasn't just an artist. He did both, and I always felt that when I grew up in a small town in Maine, that I could anything I could imagine. And anything I could draw, I could tell any kind of story that I wanted to. So that was my dream, and I remember telling my parents when I was very young that I'm going to be Jack Kirby when I grow up, and I think they were scared I'd never move out of the basement.
What comic books did you read when you were a kid?
Well, my favorite was, there was a book by Jack Kirby called Commandy, The Last Boy on Earth, and it was kind of like a spin-off of Planet of the Apes. I don't know if you remember that movie, but there was where the humans were sort of slave-like and the apes ruled the planet. But in Jack Kirby's world, it was apes and tigers and lions, and all the animals were the people in control of planet Earth. And there was this young boy named Commandy who grew up in an underground bunker. When he came up above, he was the last boy on Earth. And I felt growing up in Maine sometimes when I was the last boy on Earth. That was one of my favorites, but I also like Daredevil and Batman, and I guess more grounded superheroes, not so many. Superman I liked, but he was so powerful, and Daredevil was more like a down-to-earth superhero, and Batman as well. So those were the kinds of ones that probably my three favorites. So.
What comics do you read now?
Man, a lot of the same. I was reading Batman quite a lot. I like Mark Waid is a writer on Daredevil right now. But sometimes when I go into the comic store, I like to look at new up-and-coming artists, like independent comic books. So sometimes I'll, buy a couple of my favorites, Daredevil or Batman, like Frank Miller and Andy Kubert are working on a new Batman series. I really love that. But then I'll try a few other things that I hadn't heard of before, just to see if, I just like looking at new artists. Reminds me when I was struggling when I was growing up. So.
What comic was your most fun to work on?
Well, hands down, it has to be Turtles, because when I co-created the Turtles with Peter Laird, when we were doing it, we had this idea. Well, we were very lucky that we weren't working for a company. We didn't have a boss. We didn't have anything. The only bosses and the only people in control are us. And so, in the early days, because we didn't think, that we would sell very many of the comic books to anybody, so we decided that we'd just write the kind of comic books that we'd like to read. And so we wrote all of those early issues of the Turtles just for us. And so that was the most fun because we were just figuring out as we went along. We, put all the things that we loved about the comics we read growing up into this one idea and wrote something that we wanted to read. So it was very, very special. I think that was my favorite. And here I am, my goodness, 32 years later, still working on Turtle comic books, and it is simply the best time ever. I just really love the creativity.
These are the oldest Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics I have. If you could go back in time to that moment, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh my goodness. Well, what was really fun, you picked two of my favorites, and for many reasons, is in this series, this is Michelangelo. What we did around this time was we dedicated one issue to each of the Turtles, Leonardo, Raphael, Michelangelo, and Donatello. And I like this Michelangelo one because I'm a big fan of Christmas. You can see, even in here, I went way too Christmassy. There's holly and all that kind of stuff. But this was an adventure where in Christmas, Michelangelo could wear a hat and a scarf and a big stuffed jacket. He could walk around the city like other people could, and not be noticed as a turtle. And he finds this little stray cat, and he names it Clunk. And they go into a toy store, and they have this really nice adventure where they stop some toy thieves stealing these toys that Peter and I created called the Little Orphan Aliens. And they stop these people. It was like the Cabbage Patch dolls of that time. And they stopped the thieves and then donated the toys to an orphanage dressed up as elves. So it was a really fun, sort of silly Christmas story, and I love Christmas. Shell Shock was fun because this was a lot of short stories by different artists in the studio. I did some with, you know, Peter Laird. I did some with Ryan Brown and Jim Lawson. But the short stories were especially fun because you could tell a story like this is a 30-page story, but in these there were 6-page stories, 4-page stories, 8-page stories. So you can tell a very short adventure, something silly, an idea that you didn't have to write this big long story for, that you could do a cute story, kind of an action story, and tell it very quickly and have a lot of fun with it and then move on to the next one. But these are great books, great collections. I haven't seen these in a long time.
The Ninja Turtles started out being more of a grown-up comic, but then became more of a kid's comic. Why do you think it changed?
Well, it was very interesting in that as a comic book, like I mentioned earlier, when we started out, we just wrote it for ourselves, and at that time I was 22, 23 years old when we started, and so it was written as an older person's comic again, because we were writing it for ourselves, and writing the kind of things that we liked in comic books. But when we had the opportunity to turn it into a kid's idea, we knew that, very specifically, that we were writing for an audience that was probably 6, 7, 8 years old, maybe even a little younger, and so we softened up some of the ideas, even did things like, probably the most notable in all the early comic books, all the Turtles had red bandanas, but when we did them as a kid's cartoon, that's when we added the idea of the different colored bandanas, so you could tell them apart easier as a toy or an animated comic. And so it was really fun in the idea that we had the best of both worlds for Turtles. We could still do the original black and white stories, we could still tell an edgier kind of story, but then we had the whole animated kid side, which was for a younger audience. So it was fun to have both sides and have a nice balance. So,
What's next for you and the Ninja Turtles?
well, that's what's really fun. Is like we just finished issue 62. I've been working on the new Turtle series with a wonderful writer, a guy named Tom Waltz, and it's funny to work with someone that grew up as a fan of Turtles, and when I work with him, he's got so much energy. He knows more about the Turtles than I know sometimes. So when we work together, we have this really great energy and chemistry, and so right now we're gonna our mission is to take the current IDW series we're working on all the way to issue 100, and that'll be about another 3 years. So I think after that I'll see what I'm gonna do, but mostly Turtles right now, and I'm having the best time of my life.
Thank you for answering my questions. It was nice to meet you.
Absolute pleasure meeting you. Enjoy the rest of the